You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with Laura Hughes, public policy correspondent at the Financial Times, and Kate Andrews, economics editor at The Spectator. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Well, the front of the Metro features former MasterChef presenter Gregg Wallace speaking out against those accusing him of inappropriate behaviour, calling them middle-class women of a certain age. The Daily Mail says the BBC allowed Gregg Wallace to remain on air despite at least 4 past complaints about his behaviour. The Daily Star's front reports on the same story. Their headline, "When you're in a really, really, really deep hole, stop digging." It's the same on the front of the Mirror, which calls Wallace disaster chef. And The Sun tells the former MasterChef his to shut his cake hole. Oh, he is to shut his cake hole. In other news, the FT's Splash reports on the growing tensions in the Middle East after Russian and Syrian warplanes retaliated against rebels in Aleppo. The Daily Express reports that the government's inheritance tax changes will heavily impact family-owned businesses, costing the economy £10 billion. An exclusive poll for The Eye says almost half of voters want the Prime Minister to prioritise a free trade deal with the EU over the incoming US government. The Times leads on a warning from NHS bosses that Labour's ambitious new targets to revamp the service will risk making wait times worse. And The Guardian says a group of MPs, doctors and charities have backed a blueprint to transform palliative care for 100,000 people a year. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Laura Hughes, public policy correspondent at the Financial Times, and Kate Andrews, economics editor at The Spectator. Welcome to you both. Let's start with the Times front page. And this story, the headline, Labour NHS target will make A&E waits worse. Health chiefs are fearing side effects of faster surgery. And these are the pledges that we're going to hear from Labour, to include pledges to improve household living standards and build 1.5 million new homes and improve early years education, but also these targets to be met within the NHS.
So as part of his reset speech on Thursday, the Prime Minister is expecting him to announce that by the end of this Parliament, the NHS will be hitting its current target, where it carries out 92% of routine operations and appointments within 18 weeks. So the idea is that by the end of this Parliament, the NHS will be doing what it is currently expected to do for patients. And let's remember that 18 weeks is still a pretty long time if you're in pain. You're talking about, in some cases, waiting more than 4 months to seek treatment. Somewhat unsurprisingly here, NHS bosses are pushing back and saying, well, if you want us to prioritise this, we're not going to be able to hit our A&E targets. There's talk of serious struggle to hit mental health treatment targets. This all comes after more than half the tax rises in Rachel Reeves's budget go to NHS spending, day-to-day healthcare spending, the implication being it's still not enough. This raises a lot of questions for the Labour government about how much money is enough, what reform really looks like. The Labour Party has been running on the platform of NHS reform for years now. But one of the biggest challenges in this is not just convincing the public that major change has to happen. It really is getting to the heart of the NHS and the services provided there. This was always going to be an uphill battle. The NHS never thinks it has enough money. Dishing out that money in the budget before talk of reform may prove to have been quite a big mistake.
Laura, the accusation that, you sort of robbed Peter to pay Paul, isn't it?
Yeah, and this is at a time that NHS services across the board are under so much strain. That 18-week target that Keir Starmer is going to talk about hasn't been met in over a decade. The A&E is way behind just normal standards of care that it should be meeting for members of the public. And it's really interesting always when I think Prime Ministers in particular put these milestones out and create these very sort of one-liner policy goals, because it gives the public a chance before the next election to say to the Prime Minister, say to the governing party of the day, you have fallen short of this. But I think the Labour Party and the Labour government are well aware they have promised to turn the NHS around, and that is one of the major kind of components of their election campaign and what they've set out to do. But most health chiefs and NHS officials will tell you changing the shape of the NHS is going to take up to 10 years. It's going to take a very, very long time. So this is a risky move, I would say, given how long it has been since this particular target that he's, sticking out there and saying he's going to achieve has actually been met.
But Kate, because he is sort of putting his neck on the line and setting this target, I mean, they're going to move hell and high water to make sure that they achieve these goals, aren't they?
Well, they're certainly going to try, but again, we have a lot of problems built into the structure right now, where since the pandemic, resources and staff in the NHS have increased quite substantially, but productivity is still below its pre-pandemic 2019 levels. They're pumping more and more money into it. And again, they did so before they even started to seriously talk about reform. They were talking about consultations, but nothing concrete. And I think it raises big questions about what the price tag actually is for the NHS to be willing to move these mountains that Labour is insisting it needs to see moved. And Laura makes a very important point here that when you give yourself this kind of target, I mean, the target already exists. Let's be very clear. The NHS is supposed to be meeting this and it's not. But for the Prime Minister to say, we are going to get this done, now he's either going to succeed or fail. Now, we remember Rishi Sunak's 5 pledges. Granted, he only gave himself a year. The Prime Minister is giving himself 5 years. But unless you start making those changes right now, you've got no shot at being successful in 5 years' time. So this is still actually a very fast timeline for the Labour government if it wants to implement the changes to get the results down the line.
Laura, we turn to the Express and there's a warning from the Confederation of British Industry saying that the government's inheritance tax changes will hit family-owned businesses and hurt farms in particular.
Yeah, so they're saying that capping business property relief at £1 million is going to punish the smaller companies, smaller firms. And again, this speaks to the issues we know that are being raised by farmers about the changes in their kind of inheritance rules. And this comes, of course, at a time that we know Labour's having a bit of a difficult time with businesses across the country after the budget, increasing national insurance contributions for employers, just one of the measures that I know a lot of businesses are feeling really, really uneasy about. And it's unsurprising this story is sort of continuing to roll weeks after Rachel Reeves stood up in the House of Commons and made a series of announcements that did take a lot of businesses by surprise and some shock.
Kate, do you think we're going to see anything relative to this in the reset that we hear is coming this week?
It's going to be very difficult because the Prime Minister is not going to undo Rachel Reeves's budget. And this is what's one of the many things that's quite strange about having a reset just 5 months into winning such a massive majority, is you're doing it so soon after this budget that, as Laura says, caused a lot of people quite a lot of shock, actually, when the news came out, especially around business. If you're not going to undo it, what are you going to say that's really going to count as a reset? That's going to be a tough line for the Prime Minister to walk. A big cost that is increasingly being discussed as well are the borrowing costs for the UK. The budget pushed up borrowing costs. Investors are still willing to lend to the UK, but for more of a premium. They haven't gone down since the budget. That may end up being the real cost of this budget, just how much more it's costing the government to pay off the money that it's already spent.
To The Guardian, Laura, and the assisted dying bill, second reading on Friday, seems to have really pushed forward the need for debate on palliative care and how we address that. And that's what this article is looking at, that MPs and doctors and charities have got together and are looking seriously at palliative care and the quality of it.
Yeah, so this article suggesting there's sort of an informal, I think, commission at the moment that's being set up by a coalition of politicians and doctors in response to the assisted dying vote going through on Friday. And this is unsurprising because a large part of the debate over this bill was whether or not as a society we fund an assisted dying care pathway but not fully fund a palliative care end-of-life specialist service. At the moment, a third of hospices funding comes from the government, the rest is charity shops. So a lot of people working in that end-of-life care sector say it's a postcode lottery. Completely depends where you live in the UK in terms of what care you will be able to access at the end of your life. That this is a conversation about the end of life that we don't have that much in this country. We have birth plans, but we don't have death plans. This whole debate has raised a lot of concerns from some people, but also a possibility that actually potentially we could see end-of-life care services improve. There have been some jurisdictions in the world where legislation's been introduced. At the same time, more funding has come for other forms of palliative care. So there is a sort of trepidation, but obviously there is an opportunity for people, depending on your side of the debate. And clearly this is going to be a huge conversation, especially as we know that if this is an NHS service, which of course it's likely to be, well, what are the costs to the NHS for that? What's it going to mean for other services? How does it work for doctors? Huge, huge questions. This debate's going to rumble on for a very long time.
I think that prediction will prove to be correct. Let's move to the eye, Kate, just because we're running out of time. And this story, well, it's a poll that the eye have carried out, that almost half of the people they polled want the Prime Minister to prioritise a closer economic ties with Europe over a free trade agreement with America.
Yes, it's an exclusive poll for the iPaper in which they say about half of the voters in this poll want Labour to pursue a better trade deal with the EU rather than look to a free trade deal with the US. One of the really difficult things here is, gosh, a comprehensive, completely free-for-all free trade agreement with the European Union would be fantastic. It's the EU that's not going to sign up to that for very clear reasons, which we've known for years now, which is that they consider themselves to be a block in which you sign up to all their rules or you simply don't get those benefits. So, I mean, it would be fantastic to have, but it's not Labour that's necessarily standing in the way, just like I don't think it was Rishi Sunak's Tory party that was standing in the way of trying to get the most comprehensive free trade deal possible. And, then there are big questions about Donald Trump and those tariffs that he's threatening to slap on every country around the world, particularly on China, Canada, and Mexico at the moment. Will he pick friends? Will he pick winners when it comes to this? Does the UK want to try to be one of those friends? Will it go out of its way? These are huge questions for the cabinet to answer and will have huge impacts for British consumers, potentially, if Trump goes very hard on this.
Laura, interestingly, though, they say that in their poll, Conservative voters want to prioritise America over Brussels.
Well, and this is we're going to sort of find the government in a really interesting position because Donald Trump obviously likes doing deals and he might offer the UK a nice friendly deal to its ally. But does that then put the UK at serious odds with the EU? And how does the government walk that line? Because they're going to need to continue to do business with Europe. And we can't go so far that we can't then do that. So I honestly don't know how. I would not want to be Keir Starmer dealing with this particular conundrum. It's going to be really, really difficult.
Laura and Kate, thank you very much for the moment. We're going to take a break. Coming up, we'll discuss this story on the front of the FT. Their headline, Russian and Syrian warplanes hit back after rebels overrun Aleppo. Do stay with us for more.
Paris reverberated to the sights, sounds and smells of conflict. There's a focal point to all this anger, and that is Emmanuel Macron. I'm Adam Parsons, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels. There are dozens of people desperately clambering to get onto that boat. It is a chaotic scene, but it's being watched by dozens of French police officers on the beach. I've reported on migration across Europe, close up on the ground, understanding that sense of desperation and meeting the criminal gangs behind it. This old fishing boat set off from the Libyan port of Tobruk. There were 606 people who were on board. So we've been distributing life jackets to all the people on board this boat, and now the first person is coming on board. This is the ugly side of Italian football.
In Italy, everything is really organized.
Football's problems with hooliganism, racism were just dormant, and now they're back and they're getting worse. We cover so many countries, languages and cultures and work hard to gain trust to bring you the full story first. Help is slowly reaching these places. It's not just homes, but whole streets like this one that have been reduced to rubble and dust. This is a picture of destruction. Everywhere you look in this mountaintop community, there is absolute devastation. These are the settlers in waiting, keen to start a new life, to annex Gaza for Israel.
The least we can do is just kick them out of our land.
Gaza, which is just 2 miles in that direction, is under attack again.
Getting the chance to tell people's stories, it's a privilege.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away.
So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, Laura Hughes, public policy correspondent at the Financial Times, and Kate Andrews, economics editor at The Spectator. Let us take a look at the Sun front page. They're covering the story of Greg Wallace, the MasterChef presenter. The headline there, "Shut your cake hole, Greg."
Well,
I don't think that's quite how you say it, but
something like that. Greg Wallace came back with a defense of his behavior on MasterChef with some quite remarkable words, accusing the fury of, quote, middle-class women of a certain age for his behavior. And I think that response alone has led to a lot of backlash before we even get into the allegations against him, not least because, I mean, you can think of a lot of different ways he might have gone about defending himself that didn't include this attack on women and their age and their position and their success. The comments themselves suggest a certain lack of respect, perhaps, for the women involved, and I think that has not helped his case at all, given the allegations against him and the way that he perhaps did treat some of those women.
Well, Laura, he's insisting that he's done nothing wrong and saying he hasn't been guilty of inappropriate behaviour, so we just must say that. But clearly from the clip, he obviously really believes that.
No, I think he does really believe that, and he also really believes that because he's worked with thousands of women over the years and they're not complaining, it sort of somehow disregards the women who are making these complaints. And clearly this is so devastating for his career. From an external perspective, you can't really see how he's going to end up back on MasterChef, especially after his response and his comments that he made this morning in the very early hours of the day. One imagines without the kind of consent or knowledge of his PR team. And so he's clearly very angry here. But, you know, we see a lot of these stories in recent years, and there's normally quite a sort of standardised response, which is an expression of horror that they've upset anyone. But this is really quite an extreme reaction, and I think it's made the situation much worse for him. And the fact you have a paper, The Sun, with such a kind of strong message on their front page tomorrow shows that perhaps what he was trying to get out there has slightly backfired.
And Kate, the Mail takes the story on to the culpability, I suppose, of the BBC, saying that they were warned at least 4 times about his behaviour.
Well, I think the front of the Mail actually gets to one of the biggest questions on the table here, which is yet again for the BBC. who knew what when, and was there actually quite a lot of information at their disposal that they decided not to act on? We don't know the answers to those questions, but it's a question that has been asked before quite recently and is being asked again. It's very difficult when you're going back a decade or more about, complaints and allegations that are made about people's certain kinds of behavior, especially when they're verbal and all the memories around that. But if complaints were being lodged and filed, and presumably lots of people were seeing this kind of behavior if it was taking place, why did nobody do anything? Because, yes, Greg Wallace is in a very powerful position, but the producers above him, the people who make the calls on these shows, are in an even more powerful position. And so it's quite right to ask questions there too.
We're going to turn a corner and go to Syria. The Financial Times, their front page, what's happening in Syria with the rebels claiming to have taken Aleppo, possibly moving further into Damascus. But we've had word now from Bashar al-Assad, who's saying that he'll defend the stability and the territorial integrity in the face of terrorists and their supporters. So clearly calling them terrorists and calling on the help of Russia.
Bashar al-Assad has been aided by his allies here, certainly Russia, in terms of these quite intense airstrikes in Aleppo, and also by Iran, who sent their top diplomat to Damascus. This is a leader who has been in power for over 25 years, but certainly in recent years, this is one of the biggest attacks and threats to his leadership in an increasingly unstable Middle East, certainly. So it does seem like that backup from his allies has certainly started to help, but it remains a very tumultuous situation.
Laura, it is a very complex international puzzle, isn't it, because of other wars that are going on that are interrelated.
Exactly. So the Russians have been very much distracted by what's going on in Ukraine, Iran with what's going on in Israel, Palestine. So clearly this was a moment for these rebels, this Islamist group, to effectively take advantage of it at a point that Assad is potentially weakened because he doesn't have his sort of backup, his allies necessarily where they would have been a number of years ago. But the fact it's front page news, I think, speaks to this war and the fact it's still going on, but it's obviously very difficult to cover. It's really difficult for Western journalists to actually get into Syria to see what is happening, and it's almost been forgotten in recent years because of the other wars that we've seen going on. But clearly for many people, thousands of people still living there, it's very much alive, it's very much real, and this is an embarrassment to Assad and potentially underscores some of the weaknesses that he has in his regime at the moment.
Indeed. Laura and Kate, thank you so much for taking us through the papers. We're going to have a look at the weather for everybody now. A developing northerly wind will bring a touch of winter later tomorrow, but rain spreading from the Atlantic will lift temperatures again on Tuesday. There'll be a cooler start for most, with a patchy frost in the far north, showers or more general rain over much of northern and central Britain, and some coastal showers elsewhere. Britain will see the cloud and showery rain spreading southeast during the morning, with brighter conditions and a few wintry showers following to Scotland, but southern England will stay mostly dry. Ireland and Northern Ireland look fine, bar the odd coastal shower. It'll be cooler everywhere. Rain over central Britain will clear across the southeast later, leaving most places dry and clear, but expect a scattering of coastal showers in the north and east. Coming up next on Sky News at 11, Greg Wallace hits out at accusations about his on-set behaviour.